Niagara Falls.
Table of Contents, Niagara Falls.
Learn about the formation and scenic wonders of Niagara Falls, the Welland Canal, and the Great Lakes, St. Lawrence Seaway. All about Niagara Falls, with visiting and touring information, geography, history, attractions, and other points of interest.
Dr. Sydney Soclof. Dr. Sydney 22 at gmail.com. 2023. Narration by Dr. Sydney Soclof.
Zoe Phonemes.
And Nathan Koltove. For a complete discussion of YouTube navigation, please go to tiny.1/ytnavigator.
Introduction to Niagara Falls.
Niagara Falls are on the Niagara River as it drops down from the level of Lake Erie to that of Lake Ontario. The falls are on the international border between the Canadian province of Ontario and the U.S. state of New York.
The falls are 17 miles, 27 kilometers, north-northwest of Buffalo and 75 miles, 120 kilometers, south-southeast of Toronto. The elevation difference between these two lakes is about 326 feet, 99 meters. Half of this drop is at Niagara Falls. The Niagara River, including Niagara Falls, connects Lake Erie to Lake Ontario, the Welland Canal.
The Welland Canal provides a path for shipping between Lake Erie and Lake Ontario.
This shows the Welland Canal.
Ships can bypass Niagara Falls using the Welland Canal, which was improved and incorporated into the St. Lawrence Seaway in the 1960s.
While the Seaway diverted water traffic from nearby Buffalo and led to the demise of its steel and grain mills, other industries in the Niagara River Valley flourished with the help of the electric power produced by the river until the 1970s. Since then, the region has declined economically.
The falls were always an obstacle to navigating the upper lakes until the Trans-Severn Waterway and the Welland and Erie Canals were built to allow ships to pass around this bottleneck.
The oldest lighthouse on the U.S. side of the Great Lakes was set up at Fort Niagara in 1818 to aid navigation.
The Welland Canal is a ship canal that runs 42 kilometers, 27 miles, from Port Colborne, Ontario, on Lake Erie, to Port Welland, Ontario, on Lake Ontario, as part of the St. Lawrence Seaway. The canal allows ships to avoid Niagara Falls by traversing the Niagara Escarpment.
The Welland Canal is part of the Great Lakes Waterway, a system of channels and canals that makes all of the Great Lakes accessible to ocean-going vessels. The principal civil engineering components of the Great Lakes Waterway are the Welland Canal, bypassing Niagara Falls between Lake Ontario and Lake Erie, and the Soo Locks, bypassing the rapids of the St. Mary's River between Lake Superior and Lake Huron, at Sault Ste. Marie.
The Great Lakes Waterway is supplemented by the St. Lawrence Seaway, which makes the St. Lawrence River navigable from Montreal to Kingston, Ontario. The two waterways are often jointly referred to as the St. Lawrence Seaway.
The Great Lakes Seaway has lower gillocks and deeper drafts than the St. Lawrence Seaway, resulting in lake freighters being confined to the lakes, being small enough to operate on the waterway but too large to pass down the seaway.
The Great Lakes Waterway is co-administered by Canada and the United States. The St. Lawrence Seaway and Great Lakes Waterway opened the Great Lakes to ocean-going vessels. However, the move to wider ocean-going container ships, which do not fit through the locks on these routes, has limited shipping on the lakes.
The St. Lawrence Seaway and Great Lakes Waterway extend from Montreal to Lake Erie, including the Welland Canal and the Great Lakes Waterway. The Seaway is named after the St. Lawrence River, which it follows from Lake Ontario to the Atlantic Ocean.
Niagara Falls were formed when glaciers receded at the end of the Wisconsin glaciation, the last ice age. Water from the newly formed Great Lakes carved a path through the Niagara Escarpment en route to the Atlantic Ocean.
The falls are between the twin cities of Niagara Falls, Ontario, and Niagara Falls, New York. Niagara Falls is composed of two major sections separated by Goat Island. The two sections are Horseshoe Falls, the majority of which lies on the Canadian side of the border, and American Falls on the American side.
This shows the location of Goat Island in the Niagara River.
This shows the location of Goat Island in the Niagara River between the American and Canadian Falls.
This again shows the location of Goat Island in the Niagara River between the American and Canadian Falls. The Horseshoe Falls drop about 173 feet, 53 meters, and the height of the American Falls varies between 70 to 100 feet, 21 meters, because of the presence of giant boulders at its base.
The larger Horseshoe Falls are about 2,600 feet, 792 meters, wide, while the American Falls are 1,060 feet, 323 meters, wide.
The American Falls are 1,060 feet, 323 meters wide with a drop of 70 to 100 feet.
Viewpoints on the American shore generally are astride or behind the falls. The falls face directly toward the Canadian shore. Thus, more complete views of Niagara Falls are available from the Canadian side of the river.
This is a satellite view of the Niagara Falls region.
The deepest section of the Niagara River is just below the falls. It is so deep that it is slightly greater than the height of the falls above the river.
While not exceptionally high, the Niagara Falls are very wide. More than 6 million cubic feet, 168,000 cubic meters, of water falls over the crest line every minute in high flow.
And almost 4 million cubic feet, 110,000 cubic meters on average. It is the most powerful waterfall in North America. The Niagara Falls are renowned both for their beauty and as a valuable source of hydroelectric power. Managing the balance between recreational, commercial, and industrial uses has been challenging for the stewards of the falls since the 1800s.
The volume of water approaching the falls during peak flow season may sometimes be as much as 202,000 cubic feet per second, 5,720 cubic meters per second. Since the flow is a direct function of the Lake Erie water elevation, it typically peaks in late spring or early summer. During the summer, 100,000 cubic feet per second, 2,832 cubic meters per second, of water traverses the falls, some 90% of which goes over the Horseshoe Falls, while the balance is diverted to hydroelectric facilities. This is accomplished by employing a weir with movable gates upstream from the Horseshoe Falls.
The falls flow is first halved at night, and during the low tourist season in the winter, it remains at a flat 50,000 cubic feet per second, 1,416 cubic meters per second. Water diversion is regulated by the 1950 Niagara Treaty and is administered by the International Niagara Board of Control.
This is the American Falls.
These are spectators on Luna Island, right, as seen from Goat Island, bottom, looking towards Bridal Veil Falls, lower right, and American Falls, upper right. The smaller Bridal Veil Falls also is located on the American side, separated from the main falls by Luna Island.
About 500 other waterfalls in the world are taller than Niagara. The Angel Falls in Venezuela is the tallest at 979 meters, 3,212 feet. However, some of the tallest falls in the world have very little water flowing over them. It is the combination of height and volume that makes Niagara Falls so beautiful.
This is the Whirlpool, a sharp bend in the Niagara River.
This is a map of attractions in the Niagara Falls region. The features that became Niagara Falls were created by the Wisconsin glaciation about 10,000 years ago. The same forces also created the North American Great Lakes and the Niagara River.
All were dug by a continental ice sheet that drove through the area like a giant bulldozer, deepening some river channels to make lakes and damming others with debris. Scientists believe an old valley is buried by glacial drift at the approximate location of the present Welland Canal. When the ice melted, the upper Great Lakes emptied into the Niagara River, which followed the rearranged topography across in time. The river cut a gorge through the north-facing cliff or cuesta.
Because of the interactions of three major rock formations, the rocky bed did not erode evenly. The top rock formation was composed of erosion-resistant limestone and Lockport-Dalla stone. That hard layer of stone eroded more slowly than the underlying materials.
Immediately below the hard rock formation, comprising about 2/3 of the cliff, lay the weaker, softer, sloping Rochester Formation, Lower Silurian. This formation was composed mainly of shale, though it has some thin limestone layers.
This formation also contains ancient fossils in time. The river eroded the soft layer that supported the hard layers, undercutting the hard cap rock, which gave way in great chunks. This process repeated countless times, eventually carving out the falls. The Queenston Formation, Upper Ordovician, which is composed of shales and fine sandstones, is submerged in the river in the lower valley, hidden from view. All three formations were laid down in an ancient sea, their differences of character deriving from changing conditions within that sea. The retreat of Niagara Falls.
Falls recession. The original Niagara Falls were near the sites of present-day Queenston, Ontario, and Lewiston, New York, but the erosion of their crest has caused the waterfalls to retreat approximately 6.8 miles, or 11 kilometers southward. The Horseshoe Falls, around 2,600 feet, 790 meters, wide, has also changed its shape through erosion. It has changed from a once small arch to a horseshoe bend to the present-day gigantic, inverted V.
Just upstream from the fall's current location, Goat Island splits the course of the Niagara River, resulting in the separation of the Canadian Horseshoe Falls to the west from the American and Bridal Veil Falls to the east. Engineering has slowed erosion and recession.
Niagara Falls has moved back 7 miles in 12,500 years and may be the fastest moving waterfall in the world. Niagara Falls history.
Niagara originates from the Indian name Niagara, meaning thunder of waters.
Several figures have been suggested as the first circulating eyewitness descriptions of Niagara Falls. Frenchman Samuel de Champlain visited the area as early as 1604 during his exploration of Canada, and members of his party reported to him the spectacular waterfalls, which he described in his journals.
Finnish-Swedish naturalist Per Kalm explored the area in the early 1700s and wrote of the experience. The consensus honoree is Belgian Father Louis Hennepin, who observed and described the falls in 1677, earlier than Kalm. After traveling with explorer René Robert Cavelier, Sieur de la Salle, thus bringing the falls to the attention of Europeans. Further complicating matters, there is credible evidence that French Jesuit Reverend Paul Ragueneau visited the falls some 35 years before Hennepin's visit while working among the Huron First Nation in Canada. During the 18th century, tourism became popular, and by the mid-century, it was the area's primary industry. Napoleon Bonaparte's brother Jérôme visited with his bride in the early 19th century. During the 18th century, tourism became popular, and by the mid-century, it was the area's primary industry. Napoleon Bonaparte's brother Jérôme visited with his bride in the early 19th century.
Demand for passage over the Niagara River led in 1848 to the building of a footbridge and then Charles Elliott's Niagara Suspension Bridge. This was supplanted by German-born John Augustus Roebling's Niagara Falls Suspension Bridge in 1855. The cities of Niagara Falls, Ontario, Canada and Niagara Falls, New York are connected by 3 bridges: the Rainbow Bridge, just downriver from the falls, which affords the closest view of the falls and is open to non-commercial vehicle traffic and pedestrians.
The Whirlpool Rapids Bridge, 1 mile, 1.5 kilometers, down from the Rainbow Bridge and the oldest bridge over the Niagara River.
And the newest bridge, the Lewiston-Queenston Bridge, is located near the escarpment. Nearby Niagara Falls International Airport and Buffalo Niagara International Airport we named after the waterfall, as we Niagara University and many local businesses.
This is a hand-colored lithograph of the suspension bridge as seen from the American side.
The Niagara Falls Suspension Bridge was the world's first working railway suspension bridge. It spanned 825 feet, 251 meters, and stood 2.5 miles, 4.0 kilometers, downstream of Niagara Falls from 1855 to 1897, connecting Niagara Falls, Ontario, to Niagara Falls, New York.
The Niagara Falls Suspension Bridge carried mixed traffic on its 2 decks across the Niagara River. Trains crossed over the river on the bridge's upper deck, while pedestrians and carriages used the lower deck.
As the bridge resulted from a collaboration of 2 companies from 2 countries, it was also known by its American name, the International Suspension Bridge. The bridge had other names, including the Niagara Railway Suspension Bridge and Niagara Suspension Bridge, but the most common and definitive was simply the Suspension Bridge.
After the Civil War, the New York Central Railroad publicized Niagara Falls as a focus of pleasure and honeymoon visits. With increased railroad traffic in 1886, the Lefferts Buck replaced Roebling's wood and stone bridge with the predominantly steel bridge that still carries trains over the Niagara River today.
The first steel archway bridge near the falls was completed in 1897. Known today as the Whirlpool Rapids Bridge, it carried vehicles, trains, and pedestrians between Canada and the U.S. just below the falls.
The Whirlpool Rapids Bridge, commonly called the Whirlpool Bridge and formerly known as the Lower Steel Arch Bridge until 1937, is a spandrel-braced, riveted, 2-hinged arch bridge.
This is an international bridge between Canada and the United States. It connects the commercial downtown districts of Niagara Falls, New York, and Niagara Falls, Ontario. This bridge is approximately 1.5 kilometers, 9 miles north of the Rainbow Bridge, and about 2 kilometers, 1.2 miles from the falls.
The bridge was designed by Lefferts L. Buck and constructed between 1896 and 1897. It was constructed around the Niagara Falls suspension bridge so as not to interrupt daily traffic.
In 1941, the Niagara Falls Bridge Commission completed the third current crossing in the immediate area of Niagara Falls with a rainbow bridge, carrying both pedestrian and vehicular traffic between the two countries and Canadian and U.S. customs for each country.
This is the Rainbow Bridge crossing the Niagara River.
The Rainbow Bridge at Niagara Falls is an international steel-arched bridge across the Niagara River Gorge and is a world-famous tourist site. It connects the cities of Niagara Falls, New York and Niagara Falls, Ontario.
After the First World War, tourism boomed again as automobiles made getting to the falls much more accessible. The story of Niagara Falls in the 20th century is primarily that of efforts to harness the energy of the falls for hydroelectric power and to control the development on both sides that threatened the area's natural beauty. Hydroelectric power.
Hydroelectric power generation.
The enormous energy of Niagara Falls has long been recognized as a potential source of power. The first known effort to harness the waters was in 1759, when Daniel Joncaire built a small canal above the falls to power his sawmill.
Augustus and Petaporta purchased this area and all of American Falls in 1805 from the New York state government. They enlarged the original canal to provide hydraulic power for their grist mill and tannery.
In 1853, the Niagara Falls Hydraulic Power and Mining Company was chartered, which eventually constructed the canals which would be used to generate electricity.
In 1881, under the leadership of Jacob Soclof, enough power was produced to send direct current to illuminate both the falls themselves and nearby Niagara Falls Village.
When Nikola Tesla invented the three-phase system of alternating current, AC, power transmission, the distant transfer of electricity became possible. A memorial was later built at Niagara Falls, New York to honor him.
The world's first AC power plant was built in Ames, Colorado by Westinghouse and Tesla. This transmitted AC electricity for 2 miles at a loss of less than 5%, and thus demonstrated the effectiveness of AC power transmission. As a result, in 1883, the Niagara Falls Power Company hired George Westinghouse to design a system to generate alternating current.
4 years later, by 1896, with financing from moguls like J.P. Morgan, John Jacob Astor IV, and the Vanderbilts, they had constructed giant underground conduits leading to turbines generating upwards of 100,000 horsepower. 75 megawatts, and were sending power as far as Buffalo, 20 miles, 32 kilometers, away.
Private companies on the Canadian side also began to harness the energy of the falls. The government of the province of Ontario, Canada, eventually brought power transmission operations under public control in 1906, distributing Niagara's energy to various parts of the Canadian province.
Between 50% and 75% of the Niagara River's flow is diverted via huge tunnels far upstream from the waterfalls. The water then passes through hydroelectric turbines that supply power to nearby areas of Canada and the U.S. before returning to the river well past the falls.
The most powerful hydroelectric stations on the Niagara River are Sir Adambeck 1 and 2 on the Canadian side.
This is the Robert Moses Niagara Power Plant and the Lewiston Pump Generating Plant on the American side. This shows the location of the power plants. This is the Niagara River Storage Reservoir for the Robert Moses Niagara Power Plant.
This is the Robert Moses Niagara Power Plant.
This shows the Niagara power plants on the Canadian and American sides of the Niagara River.
Niagara Falls has long been a source of inspiration for explorers, travelers, artists, authors, filmmakers, residents, and visitors. Only some of whom realize that the falls were nearly devoted exclusively to industrial and commercial use in the 1870s. Sightseers had limited access to Niagara Falls and often had to pay merely for a glimpse. Industrialization threatened to carve up Goat Island to power expanding commercial development. Other industrial encroachments and lack of public access led to a conservation movement in the U.S. known as Free Niagara. Led by such notables as Hudson River School artist Frederick Edwin Church, landscape designer Frederick Law Olmsted, and architects Henry Hobson Richardson. Church approached Lord Dufferin, Governor-General of Canada, with a proposal for international discussions on establishing a public park. Erosion control efforts have also been important. Underwater weirs redirect the most damaging currents, strengthening the top of the falls in 1969. For example, the Niagara River was entirely diverted from the American Falls for several months by constructing a temporary rock and earth dam, clearly visible in the photo at left.
While the Horseshoe Falls absorbed the extra flow, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers studied the riverbed and mechanically bolted faults that would otherwise have hastened the retreat of the American Falls.
A plan to remove the huge mound of talus deposited in 1954 was abandoned owing to cost. And in November 1969, the temporary dam was dynamited, restoring flow to the American Falls.
Even after these undertakings, Luna Island, the small piece of land between the main waterfall and the Bridal Veil, remained off-limits to the public for years owing to fears that it was unstable and could collapse into the gorge at any time. Not far away from the falls, commercial interests have prevailed. The recent construction of several tall buildings, most of them hotels, on the Canadian side resulted in a remarkable alteration and urbanization of the landscape.
It has also caused the airflow over the falls to change direction. The result is that the viewing areas on the Canadian side are now often obscured by a layer of mist over the falls. In October 1829, Sam Patch, who called himself the Yankee Leapster, jumped from a high tower into the gorge below the falls and survived. This began a long tradition of daredevils trying to go over the falls.
This is Maria Spelterini crossing the Niagara Gorge on a tightrope on July 4, 1876.
On October 24, 1901, 63-year-old Michigan school teacher Annie Edson Taylor was the first to go over the falls in a barrel as a publicity stunt. She survived, bleeding but virtually unharmed. Soon after exiting the barrel, she said, "No one should ever try that again." Since Taylor's historic ride, 14 other people have intentionally gone over the falls in or on a device, despite her advice. Survivors of such stunts face charges and stiff fines, as it is illegal, on both sides of the border, to attempt to go over the falls. Some have survived unharmed, but others have drowned or been severely injured.
In 1911, Bobby Leach became the second person to go over Niagara Falls in a barrel, after Andy Taylor did it in 1901. He spent 6 months in the hospital recovering from injuries he sustained during the fall, which included 2 broken kneecaps and a fractured jaw.
Other daredevils have made crossing the falls by tightrope their goal, starting with the successful passage by Charles Blondin in 1859. These tightrope walkers drew huge crowds to witness their exploits. Their wires ran across the gorge, near the current Rainbow Bridge, not over the waterfall itself. In what some called the miracle at Niagara, Roger Woodward, a 7-year-old boy, was swept over the Horseshoe Falls protected only by a life vest in 1960, as 2 tourists pulled his 17-year-old sister Deanne from the river only 20 feet, 6 meters, from the lip of the Horseshoe Falls at Goat Island.
Minutes later, Roger was plucked from the roiling plunge pool beneath the Horseshoe Falls after grabbing a life ring thrown to him by the crew of the Maid of the Mist boat. His survival, which no one thought possible, made news worldwide.
In 1984, Carol Sosek from Hamilton, Ontario, successfully plunged over the Horseshoe Falls in a barrel with only minor injuries. Sosek was fined $500 for performing the stunt without a license. In 1985, Steve Trotter became the youngest person at age 22 and the first American in 25 years to go over the falls in a barrel. 10 years later, Trotter went over the falls again, becoming the second person to go over the falls twice and survive. Illusionist David Copperfield performed a trick in which he appeared to travel over the Horseshoe Falls in 1990. In 1918, there was a near disaster when a barge, known locally as the Niagara Scow, working upriver, broke its tow and almost plunged over the falls. Fortunately, the vessel grounded on rocks just short of the falls.
The Niagara Scow is the unofficial name of the wreck of a small scow that brought 2 men perilously close to plunging over the Horseshoe Falls, the largest of the Niagara Falls. The wreck can still be seen upstream of the falls.
The Niagara Falls in movies and television.
One of the first films with Niagara Falls as the local was released in 1941 under the name Niagara Falls.
Already a huge tourist attraction and a favorite spot for honeymooners, Niagara Falls visits rose sharply in 1953 after the release of Niagara, a movie starring Marilyn Monroe and Joseph Cotten.
Later in the 20th century, the falls was a featured location in the 1980s movie Superman 2 and was the subject of a popular IMAX movie, Niagara: Miracles, Myths and Magic.
Peak numbers of visitors occur in the summertime when Niagara Falls are both a daytime and evening attraction. From the Canadian side, floodlights illuminate both sides of the falls for several hours after dark.
About 13 million visitors come to Niagara Falls each year.
The oldest and best-known tourist attraction at Niagara Falls is the Maid of the Mist boat cruise, named for an ancient Angara Indian mythical character. These boats have carried passengers into the whirlpools beneath the falls since 1846, and operate from boat docks on both sides of the falls.
The Maid of the Mist starts at a calm part of the Niagara River, near the Rainbow Bridge, and takes its passengers past the American and Bridal Veil Falls, then into the dense mist of spray inside the curve of the Horseshoe Falls.
All the boats are named Maid of the Mist, followed by a different Roman numeral.
The tour is available starting from either the Canadian or U.S. side of the river, returning to the starting point in each case.
The American side of the Niagara Falls.
From the U.S. side, the American Falls can be viewed from walkways along Prospect Point Park, which also features the Prospect Point Park Observation Tower and a boat dock for the Maid of the Mist. Goat Island is a small uninhabited island in the Niagara River, located in the middle of Niagara Falls between the Bridal Veil Falls and Horseshoe Falls. The island is at the southwest corner of the city of Niagara Falls, and of Niagara County, New York in the United States.
This shows the location of Goat Island between the Rainbow Falls on the Canadian side and the American Falls on the US side. Also shown here is Prospect Point.
Goat Island is a popular destination for tourists visiting the falls on the US side, offering some of the most spectacular views available there, particularly at Terrapin Point. The island is mainly wooded and is interlaced with foot trails. It is connected to the U.S. mainland by two bridges carrying foot, car, and trackless train traffic. An elevator provides access to the foot of the falls and the Cave of the Winds tour. Goat Island is connected to the U.S. mainland by two bridges carrying foot, car, and trackless train traffic. The Cave of the Winds is a natural cave behind Bridal Veil Falls. The cave is 130 feet, 40 meters, high, 100 feet, 30 meters, wide and 30 feet, 9 meters, in depth.
This shows the location of the Cave of the Winds, Bridal Veil Falls and the monument to Nikola Tesla.
This is an oath map of Goat Island and part of Niagara Falls, New York, showing major points of interest.
The Cave of the Winds was discovered in 1834 and dubbed Diela's Cave initially, after the Greek god of winds. Guided tours began officially in 1841 and continued until a rock fall in 1920 made it clear the passage was no longer safe.
Goat Island offers more views of the falls and is accessible by foot and automobile traffic by bridge above the American Falls. From Goat Island, the Cave of the Winds is accessible by elevator and leads hikers to a point beneath Bridal Veil Falls.
The tour officially reopened in 1924. Now bringing visitors to the front of the Bridal Veil instead of behind it on a series of decks and walkways. Tropical storm-like conditions can be experienced, as winds can reach up to 68 miles per hour underneath the falls.
Also on Goat Island are the Three Sisters Islands, the Pewee Portal, where a massive statue of Nikola Tesla can be seen, and a walking path that enables views of the rapids, the Niagara River, the gorge, and all of the falls. Most of these attractions lie within the Niagara Falls State Park.
The Niagara Scenic Trolley offers guided trips along the American Falls and around Goat Island. Panoramic and aerial views of the falls can also be viewed from the Flight of Angels helium balloon ride or by helicopter. The Canadian side of the Niagara Falls.
On the Canadian side, Queen Victoria Park features manicured gardens, platforms offering spectacular views of both the American and Horseshoe Falls, and underground walkways leading into observation rooms that yield the illusion of being within the falling waters.
This is the Queen Victoria Park.
The observation deck of the nearby Skyline Tower offers the highest overhead view of the falls and, in the opposite direction, gives views as far as distant Toronto. This is the Skyline Tower.
This shows the falls view area of Niagara Falls, Canada.
There are 11 hotels that offer a view of Niagara Falls and are located in the Falls View area of Niagara Falls, Canada. This is the Condominium Auditory in the Falls View area, surrounded by hotels and casinos.
The Whirlpool Aerocar, built in 1916 from a design by Spanish engineer Leonardo Torres y Quevedo, is a cable car that takes passengers over the Whirlpool on the Canadian side. The journey behind the falls, accessible by elevators from the street-level entrance, consists of an observation platform and series of tunnels near the bottom of the Horseshoe Falls on the Canadian side. The journey behind the falls, known until the early 1990s as the Scenic Tunnels, is an attraction in Niagara Falls located in the Table Rock Center beside the Canadian Horseshoe Falls and open year-round.
The journey consists of an observation platform and a series of tunnels near the bottom of the Horseshoe Falls. The tunnels and platform can be reached by elevators from the street-level entrance. The tour is unguided, and visitors can use radios to receive facts and information broadcast into the tunnels.
The two tunnels extend approximately 46 meters behind the waterfall, allowing visitors to view water cascading in front of the open cave entrances. The observation deck provides a vantage point looking up at the falls to the right.
This allows photographers a full view of the famous landmark. The deck is sprayed with water from the cascade, so visitors are provided with plastic raincoats before their descent.
This is the American Falls and Bridal Veil Falls as viewed from the Maid of the Mist.
This is Horseshoe Falls.
This is Horseshoe Falls.
This is Clifton Hill on the Canadian side.
This is a view of the falls from the Rainbow Bridge.
These are the Canadian and American Falls at dusk.
Recommended videos.
Recommended video, Top 10 Things to Do in Niagara Falls.
Recommended video, Niagara Falls, Ontario, Canada. Recommended video, the legendary history behind Niagara Falls. Recommended video, a short story on Niagara Falls.
Recommended video, YouTube navigation.
Recommended videos. Walking tours of Niagara Falls. For a street-level experience, view the video walking tours. It's the next best thing to being there.
Recommended videos, Walking Tour of Niagara Falls playlist.
Table of contents, Niagara Falls.
Thanks for watching. Please watch some more of my great videos.